Then behavior. Now we want to talk about understanding behaviors and how to differentiate them. So I can just give you a very simple definition that a behavior is simply what someone does. It's an action. Okay? That's a behavior. That's a verb, right? So what you do actually is what is a verb, which is a doing word. That's a response, that's action. So running is a behavior, crying is a behavior, eating is a behavior. Not wanting to associate with other people besides mom is a behavior. Taking off your shoes, running around barefoot, it's a behavior. Writing your assignment, it's a behavior. So anything that's action-based, it's a behavior. But then we have what we call desirable and undesirable behaviors. So desirable behaviors are, we can just say those are socially acceptable behaviors. Something that we can say if someone does it in the street or at home, we don't raise eyebrows because it's a normal thing to do. Okay? So when a teacher says take out your books and write your math, if everyone does it, that's a desirable behavior because that's what the teacher actually wants the learners to do. If you say let's eat at home, all the children get their place and they eat, that's a desirable behavior because that's the intention. But when someone does the opposite of what we want them to do, then we can sometimes call it undesirable behaviors. All right? And that's what we basically want to talk about today and understand better. So a behavior, we can call it it's undesirable if maybe it affects one's ability to learn. We can say that's undesirable. If that behavior causes harm to self or others, that's undesirable behavior. If the behavior's intensity, frequency, and duration is abnormal, we can say that's undesirable behavior. Let me explain. Crying on itself, we cannot say crying is an undesirable behavior because if someone hits you or if you lose your close relative, you cry, isn't it? But that's acceptable socially, all right? But if the intensity or the frequency or the duration of crying exceeds the normal, then that's when we say, now this crying is undesirable, all right? So this is a child, when they see someone playing with their toy, then this child begins to cry for 30 minutes non-stop, screaming so loud that the whole block can hear. And this actually happens frequently throughout the day. Then that's when we begin to say, this is a meltdown, this is a tantrum, and it's unacceptable or undesirable, actually. So those are the kind of behaviors that we want to talk about today. So to understand behaviors, we just have what we call the ABC. I'll just browse through here. So when you say ABC, we are simply saying no behavior just happens from nowhere. All behaviors come from somewhere. We might not notice where they're coming from, but when you see a behavior occurring, just know that it's coming from somewhere. And where those behaviors are coming is what we, all right? The antecedent. This is something which occurs right before the behavior comes. Okay. For example, you feel angry, you cry, you get food. All right. So John is hungry, John cries, mommy gives John some food. So that feeling, the hunger, is the antecedent. That's the condition which comes before a behavior. So it can be automatic like hunger, or it can be a verbal directive. If I say sit down, the child sits. So me telling the child to sit down is the antecedent to the behavior of sitting down. Because my instruction of saying sit down is what comes before the behavior of sitting down. All right? So the antecedent is what comes before the behavior, is what triggers the behavior. Then the B stands for behavior, which is the response to the antecedent. Okay? So hunger comes when you cry. That's the response now. That's the action. That's the behavior. All right? When I say sit down, you sitting down, the incident of you sitting down, that's the behavior. And then the C simply stands for the consequence. So consequence is that thing that comes after the behavior. All right? In relation to the antecedent and the actual behavior. Okay. So if I say put the cup in the sink, the child takes the cup and puts it in the sink, then I say good job. Me saying good job, that's the consequence. All right? You remember this example from before. Or if John is hungry, John cries, mommy gives John some food. So John is hungry, that's the antecedent. John cries, that's the behavior. Mom giving John the food, that's the consequence. So a consequence can be, something that is positive or something that is negative. It doesn't matter. An antecedent can be something that is positive or something that is negative. So I just discussed this so that you understand when we go further. This ABC is going to help you a lot to know which behavioral intervention plan to use and which not to use, because you can't effectively manage behavior if you don't know these three instances. Okay? And then there are mainly two principles about behavior. Okay? Any behavior, there are about two principles to it. Number one, if a behavior is followed by a positive response, by a positive consequence, or a desirable consequence, let me put it that way. If a behavior is followed by a desirable consequence, then the likelihood of that behavior occurring again increases. That's the first principle. If you do something and that action is followed by a desirable response, you are more likely going to do the same thing again. You can apply this to anything in life. You are playing football or any sport, you score and the crowd goes, yay, they celebrate. It means as a player, you are more likely going to repeat the same action because you have received desirable consequence to your actions. If John cries because he's hungry and then he gets food, it simply means that next time when John feels hungry, he's going to cry again because he knows the crying gets me the food that I want. You see? You go to work, at the end of the month, you get paid. So that salary is the desirable consequence. So it means next month you're going back to work again. The boss will not have to tell you, on the first, I think you need to come. But no, he will just see you showing up at the door. I've come to work. Why? I want to get paid, right? So that behavior of working will increase in future because you are after the salary. So that's the first principle about behavior. Then the next one is exactly the opposite. If a behavior is followed by an undesirable consequence, then the likelihood of that behavior occurring again decreases. So as we are saying, if you do something and it's followed by an undesirable consequence, then you don't necessarily need to repeat the same thing again, because you know, I'm just going to suffer. I'm not going to gain anything from my actions. All right? So usually corporal punishment applies this rule to say a child steals something, we beat the child. That actually, so caning the child, we are trying to tell them, if you do it again, there's more trouble. So the consequence is undesirable. But caning is not an effective measure. You will see as we go. I'm not saying we should cane our children. So if John is feeling angry and then John cries, but then mom don't give John the food, all right? But mom waits for John to be calm and then tell John to appropriately ask for food. And then when John says, "Mommy, may I have some food?" And then that's when John gets the food. It means that the behavior of crying for food was not met with a desirable consequence. So John more likely is not going to cry for food again in the future because he knows that crying will not get me the what? The food. So everything we're going to discuss about intervention and behavior management is hinged upon these two core principles. Because we want to increase and we want to decrease behaviors. You may ask, you may understand why we want to decrease behaviors, to say crying, meltdowns, and tantrums, yes, but you may not understand why we may need to increase behaviors. So yeah, the answer is that some behaviors, to be socially acceptable, they need to occur frequently with high intensity. For example, verbal communication or just communication in general. A child may not know how to communicate. That's a behavior. So we want to increase the occurrence of communication. What do? We apply this principle. Okay? So yes, there are behaviors that we seek to decrease and there are behaviors that we seek to increase as we try to help our children. I'm going to talk the last thing about understanding behaviors. So the last subheading on understanding behaviors is what we call the functions of behavior. Why do children behave in ways that they do? And when I'm done talking about this, that's when we move to the next phase about this workshop, which is the behavior management aspect itself, like the actual intervention procedures. All right. So by functions of behavior, we are simply saying reasons why a behavior occurs. So we are mainly focusing on the A of behaviors. All right. This A will tell us why a behavior is occurring, and this A will tell us how we should manage the behavior. All right. Before we go deep into that, just keep it at the back of your mind that we can have a similar behavior, an identical behavior, the four of us. All right. Me, more blessing, tsitsi, and fortunate. We can exhibit identical behaviors, let's say tantrums. Okay? But the management of those behaviors can be different in all four cases. What works for me can be different from what works for more blessing, for tsitsi, and for fortunate. Why? It's because of this A, and it's because of what we are going to talk about, the functions of behavior. All right. So the first function is what we call tangible, or access to tangible. Access to tangible. A child behaves, or a person behaves in any way, simply because they want to get access to tangible. All right. I want a burger. I go to the shops, I buy the burger, and I eat. Okay. So that behavior of me going to the shops and buying the burger is influenced by my desire for the burger. And that desire for the burger is the antecedent. And how do we classify it? We classify it as tangible. I want to gain access to something that is tangible. So I behave in a certain way because I want to gain access to something, to an item or an activity. Okay? The child may come to you and say, "Mama, I want to go outside and play on the swings." Then you say you can go, and then they go and they play on the swings. That's a desirable trial, right? So the function, why they came to you to ask for permission, because remember, coming to you and asking for the permission is the behavior, but what triggered is the access to the swing, all right? And the swing is something that is tangible. So they come, they ask, and then they go and play. John cries because he wants sweets, and then mama gives him the sweets. So why is John crying? The function is tangible. Tangible for what? Sweets. So that's the reason why children behave in ways that they do, to gain access to tangible. Reason number 2 is children behave in ways they do because they want to escape or avoid something. All right? So a child behaves in ways that they do because they want to escape or avoid something. Or a person, any person, even you, even me. Okay? You are sitting outside, all of a sudden we see you, you're grabbing your chair and you're going back inside. Then we sit down, we analyze, why did you do that? And then you say, it's now hot outside. So that behavior of you picking up your chair and going back inside was influenced by the need to escape or avoid the sun. All right? So this function is called avoidance or escape. So sometimes children cry because they just want to avoid a certain situation. For example, you give them an assignment, maybe to color or to draw something, to trace something out, to cut something, to thread some beads or anything, and then they start crying. That crying as a behavior is influenced by the antecedent of not wanting to do anything. Maybe they're tired, they're satiated, and that falls under the function of escape or avoidance. You see someone walking outside, suddenly they start running. Why? Because it's about to rain, right? So the behavior of running away, taking cover, is because you want to avoid the rain that is about to come. So similar to our children, they behave in different ways because they want to avoid different situations. All right. Then the third function is attention. Attention. All right. You see someone doing something simply because they want to grab attention of other people. All right. And this is very common, like in our life. You know, anyone can just do it. I'm sure the fashion shows, and I mean, ladies, you understand this better. Like you dress, you go buy something beautiful because there's an event, simply because you want people to acknowledge you and say, yeah, she's looking smart, you know. So you buy. That behavior of you shopping for those nice dresses is influenced by this function of attention. A child may just start laughing simply because they want you to reprimand them. And you reprimanding them as a teacher or as a parent is the attention that they are looking for in some cases. Or they start screaming because they are not getting that attention. Sometimes a child may just be playing, you know, with his or her toys, and then suddenly she starts or he starts crying, and you can't figure out what's happening. Sometimes he's just telling you, it's been an hour and you've never said hi to me, or you've never given me a hug, you know. So she's just saying, pay attention to me for now. Ask me what's wrong for 5 minutes non-stop, and then I'll keep quiet when I get the full attention that I want from you. Okay? Which is why sometimes I left it out when I talked about the recommendations, that when you are dealing with these kinds of behavior, try by all means to avoid eye contact with the child if he or she is engaged in undesirable behaviors, because giving them the eye contact, you're actually acknowledging and giving them the attention that they are looking for. So you just correct them, you direct them, but you don't necessarily need to look them in the eye. Especially when they're making tantrums or meltdowns, you don't say, keep quiet, shh, what is it? What is it? Can you keep quiet? Once you're actually looking at them, asking them what's wrong, keep quiet, non-stop. Okay? Sometimes you just look to the side, you make sure the child is not harming themselves, is not destroying property, is getting the full love, of course, but just don't look them in the eye direct for the whole period, because they might just be looking for that attention from you. So you just look aside and then you manage and you deal with the behavior. Then the last function or the last reason why children or anyone behave in ways they do is what we call automatic / sensory. Right. So this is the most fascinating function and the most difficult to do with in some cases, because you may never really figure out the actual cause of the behavior, but you just know that this is a sensory issue or this is an automatic response to something. So this is when a child behaves in a way simply because it's an automatic response. Sometimes they cannot control it. In most cases, actually, they cannot control it. So a perfect example, like you drinking some water. Okay, why are you drinking some water? And then you tell me because I'm thirsty. You know, hunger, thirst, like those are automatic mechanisms, sensory mechanisms within our bodies, all right, that drive us to do something. So you can't say, I choose when to get hungry and I choose when not to get hungry. Or I choose when to get thirsty. Or, I mean, you've got itchy ears and then you start scratching them. We can't tell you don't scratch your ears because it's a sensory thing. It's an automatic response. All right? Taking off shoes to walk barefooted, it can be an automatic or sensory thing. Crying sometimes, a child can just cry because they just need those hugs. Sometimes when you hug them, you know, give them back pats, deep pressure. You see massages, deep joints, squeezes, you see they begin to calm down. All right? We're going to cover more of that when we talk about the intervention process, but yeah, just know at the back of your mind that this is also a function or a reason why a child may behave in ways that they do. So, going back to the scenario I gave you in the first place, that myself, fortunate, more blessings, we can exhibit a similar kind of behavior, but for different reasons, and management can be different. So suppose we are all crying, we are all doing tantrums, but I can be crying because I want access to my phone. Fortunate can be crying because she wants to avoid doing her homework. More blessing can be crying because she wants attention from her mother. Tsitsi can be crying because she just doesn't feel right in her body. It's an automatic response. She just feels like crying. So you see, it's all crying, but the reasons why we are crying are different. The functions why we are crying are different. The antecedents to the crying behavior in all four cases are different. So we really need to know the function. Actually, there is a rule that if you don't know the function, then you can't effectively deal with the behavior. And that is true. Suppose you see me crying and then you say, don't worry, you can stop doing the homework. You are assuming because I'm crying because I don't want to do the homework, yet I was crying for my phone. Do you think I'm going to stop crying? No. Up until you give me my phone, that's when I stop crying. So the function in this case will be access to tangible. That's why I'm crying, but you are dealing it as if it's an escape or avoidance function or scenario. So I will never stop crying. So for us as parents, as therapists, as teachers, to effectively deal with the behaviors of our children, we need to know the function first. We can never really effectively deal with behavior if we don't know the functions that we're working with at any particular time. The same child may cry at 10 o'clock, they may cry at 11 o'clock, they may cry at 1 o'clock. But the way we deal with those tantrums should be different according to the function at play. At 10 o'clock, they were crying for porridge, but at 11, they are crying for a phone. At 12, they are crying to go outside and play. At 2 o'clock, they are crying because they've been sitting in the doctor's office for too long. and they can't take it anymore. That's a sensory automatic response. All right? So we really need to know the function first if we want to successfully deal with the behavior. Which reminds me about another recommendation that as parents, we just need to be confident in everything we do with our children. For example, if we go out to grocery stores, hospitals, public places, anywhere, in some cases, when I work with children with special needs, and then we do the lesson of when we teach them how to do shopping, okay, we go and we talk to the management or the supervisors that, okay, I've got my child here, we want to learn this skill, but they've got challenges, 1, 2, 3 challenges. So can you facilitate us? In some cases, you see they may even clear the queues from a specific till, and then they say you can come and make payment here. Because you know that your child can't stand in a queue for long. But because you're not confident enough to work the situation around, you're forced to stand in the queue, and then the child begins to act in different ways, and you can't manage. Sometimes you just leave the shop without doing what you intended to do, simply because you can't manage the behavior. But if you take this process, sometimes you see, just go and you pick your things, you go and you pay, you leave the shop. No one is frustrated, no one is crying. That's a happy experience. When you go back shopping with that child, he may enjoy the experience because he knows. But if you make him stand in a queue for long, the next time when you say shopping, that's another behavior that's coming again. So issues of confidentiality which come into play, especially if you are teachers and therapists, you don't just divulge that information to anyone. You just make sure you're talking to someone who is important in that scenario, who needs to know, and who may have been given permission, maybe by the parent, to talk about the situation. Okay. So just a recap, we have talked about general recommendations when dealing with the behavior, and we have also talked about how to understand behaviors and how to differentiate behaviors.